Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1361. It's done? You said you are done? Seth asked the moment Nadal opened the door. Just a moment ago, he had still been in Y City, idly talking with Baker about his plans and schedule for the railway construction. When Nadal called him, the blacksmith went as far as using home call to directly return to Mina's march. The old man didn't even have time to put away the communication orb before Seth appeared at the door to his workshop. Seth? How did you? Yeah, we just finished. The slightly confused tailor came to terms with the sudden situation and spoke with a warm smile. He thought of something like the spring of youth and the beauty of young love, but he didn't mention any of it. He invited the blacksmith in. Seth's eyes immediately fell on the set of leather armor on the tailor Judy. It looked still as dark and gorgeous as the first time he was able to take a look at it, but now the armor parts had a certain shine to them, bearing witness to their additional magical properties. Interestingly enough, when Seth used appraisal on the armor, the flavor text credited him for the enchantments done to the armor, not Run. This was probably because Run was technically part of his skill, since he added him to the Spirit Forge. He wouldn't complain that his name was on another 7 legendary pieces of equipment, but Seth knew that this was not his accomplishment. It seems like you have really outdone yourself, Run, Seth praised, as he read the descriptions of the 7 set pieces. Excluding the token for Nam, this was the first time the genius enchanter had a chance to shine and proved himself worthy of his title as a genius enchanter golem. The nature of his enchantments clearly differed from what a blacksmith was usually able to do, including the fortification of skill. The hooded cape, for example, carried the enchantment called Assassin's Cloak, which increased the effect of stealth skills by 30% and doubled the damage of surprise attacks. But there were also obscure enchantments based on the meshing of various spells, like Willow Wind and Equine Legs on the trousers. While the latter improved charging and movement skills by 50%, Willow Wind gave a kind of bullet time power. During an incoming attack, the enchantment increased agility, dynamic vision, and reaction speed for a short moment to double the likelihood to evade. There were some more interesting effects like Last Straw on the armor. Technically, it was a shield that could negate a fatal attack once a day. Another effect on the armor was Divergent Defense, which worked well with the damage dispersion of the armor. The effect somehow increased the chance for attacks to glance off or be deflected by the armor by 35 to 70%, depending on the power of the attack. This worked well with the Willow Wind enchantment, as a partial evasion could lead to a successful deflection. A successfully deflected attack wouldn't even deal damage. In the best case, there was even a chance of 2% to disarm the enemy, which sounded kinda hilarious. Most importantly, these powers and effects didn't cost anything, despite the armor not having a soul. This was probably the biggest advantage of arcane enchantments. While they used up materials during the enchantment process, they usually had no cost when used, except for cooldowns or charge times. Wow, what's with these gloves? Seth exclaimed when he read the description of the power imbued into the pair of leather gloves. The effect was called Transient Conversion and allowed to change the nature of one's skill damage. I heard about Lord Mike's equipment and felt inspired. Considering Lady Mina deals in both magic damage and physical damage, I thought it was a good idea to allow her to focus on one, depending on the situation, the golem explained. Transient Conversion on the left glove raised the cost of the next skill by 50% to turn the magical damage that would be dealt into physical damage. The right glove did the opposite for the same price. This way, Mina, who dabbled in both assassin skills and magician skills, would be able to focus on her opponent's weakness in case they had a higher defense or magic resistance. The only effect breaking away from this pattern was the enchantment on the boots. While Elven Step was a permanent effect that silenced any sound and erased any trace of the wearer, Fairy Step allowed the user to walk in the air. It was a weaker version of the Soaring Immortal or the Boots of Levitation. Using 200 mana, the wearer was able to create a foothold in the air and step on it. However, it only had a duration of 0.2 seconds, so one couldn't just stay in the air and had to keep moving. Dancing in the air like a fairy was apparently the origin of the name of the enchantment. Although it used mana, it would be a good substitute for the feather fall skill her current Midnight Paws boots held. Mina would just have to get used to the change. If the cat girl didn't want to miss the passive skill, maybe they would find a way to enchant something else with it for her. Both together would enable her to almost fly. But it was normal that she would have to get used to the changes. Her current Midnight set was of a similar material but specialized for her past combat style, when Mina was still closer to a pure assassin, while she was now leaning more in the direction of the Shadow Mage. Keeping Lady Mina's maneuverability in mind, I didn't choose levitation for the boots, as the levitation would restrict the wearer's momentum in combat, Run commented as they spoke about the boots. Levitation was better suited for casters who needed to stay stationary during casting and only used it to gain distance from earthbound opponents. In Mina's case, the footholds would be used for movement, so it was better to just create footholds to jump off of, than levitation, which had its own flight rules. Good work, Run, Naddle. Once again, congrats on your magnum opus. Seth praised the two. He was sure Mina would like the new armor. Since it was still very similar to her current midnight set, it would not take too long to get used to the changes. While the two who had cooperated to make the new set were looking proudly at their work, Seth's mind had already returned to thinking of how to hand it over to the future user. After all, he had things he wanted to accomplish with the presentation of the new armor. If he wanted to properly ask the two of them to marry him, he had to prepare something special. He had tried coming up with something special over the past 2 days, but things only fell in place today, when he was driving around in Baker's new bullet train. It couldn't be some void romance, like the trash they kept showing on TV in the past. They weren't the kind of girls he could ask over a nice dinner. Well, he could, but it wouldn't be anything special. He wanted to show that he knew them. At least enough to make this not just romantic, but also fun. He had already made a rough plan, what was left now was preparing everything without any of the girls finding out about his plans. The first step was kidnapping Link. Shadow Stalker Cuirass. Legendary Shadow Stalker Set 1/7. Legendary. Physics Defense 2100. Mag Defense, 2350. Durability, 4500. 1 plus 75% affinity with darkness. 2 plus 150% power of shadow-related skills and spells. 3 Shadow Hide. 4 Damage Dispersion. 5 Final Straw. 6 Divergent Defense. Set Effect 3/7. Plus 100% power in darkness. 30% affection with darkness. Set Effect 5/7. Plus 200% power in darkness. 50% affection with darkness. Active Skill, Shadow Clones. Set Effect 7/7. Minor Speed of Arachne. Plus 300% power in darkness. 70% affection with darkness. Trait, Shadow Body. The central piece of Master Fadley's magnum opus. A cuirass fashioned from the hide of a legendary predator. A phenomenal piece of equipment for any practitioner of the dark arts, which will truly blossom in conjunction with the rest of the set. The piece was further enhanced through the skills of Master Smith, the first Master Enchanter of Earth. Chapter 1362 The Dark Light Crossing. Evening of the same day. Where are we going? The blindfolded Mina asked as he led her and the blindfolded Finn into the space of Legion. Is this going to be something kinky? I don't know what you are planning, but the blindfolds are a good start, Finn commented with a cheeky grin. Geez, no. It's nothing kinky, at least not yet. Were you always this horny? The blacksmith joked with a smile. Now that Finn mentioned it, maybe they should do something with blindfolds at some point. No, but it's not like I had someone to be horny with, the fairy brute countered seductively. Hey now, don't you two go off on that tangent without me. Yes, the rambunctious cat girl laughed. You are blindfolded because I have a surprise for you too, so calm down for a moment and wait here. I will be back soon, the bard instructed them before leaving them in the space of Legion. For the surprise to work, they couldn't know where they were going just yet. If his plan worked, they would even notice they had moved away from Mina's march. Tower, to Woburn, he instructed the tower ego once the girls were stored away. Within the blink of an eye, he appeared at the teleport hub of the Labyrinth City in the Holy Land of the Adventurer Guild. But this wasn't his final destination. He did not ride Tatzel this time, in fact, he didn't bring the little dragon along. The Imuji stayed back at Mina's march. Wearing the helmet of Hades and using the speed and teleport of his scorpion armor, he quickly left the city behind, before switching to Vakr, the Golem Griffin. Flying the Griffin, he dove into the canyon, the entrance to what the guild called the Abyss. The subterranean network of caves and dungeons where beasts of Leave 100 plus were no rarity. This was the place where the elites of the Oath Guards came to try and break past the Leave 90 and step on the path to legend. The Abyss was a place teeming with powerful enemies and a focus of the power of the dungeon god. Seth had come here for a single reason, to embark on the greatest adventure of his life and propose to his two girlfriends. Entering the underground, the blacksmith got off the golem and started running on his own 2 feet again. His helmet allowed him to evade any dangers that could have eaten up his time and directly aim for the dark light crossing. It was a massive cavern. Luminous moss and bioluminescent mushrooms gave this place its name. If it wasn't for the fact that this place was surrounded by some of the most terrifying dungeons found on Earth, it would have been beautiful. It was perfect for a romantic dinner. The crossing was a more or less famous place as it was a relatively safe cavern, connected to several passages leading deeper into the abyss. The few guilds and parties that dared venture deeper into the abyss would use it as a campsite before diving into one of the many dungeons that could be reached from here. To think I would ever professionally cook in this place, Link, the kidnapped gourmet hunter, mumbled as he stepped out from Legion's space. While the chef set up his portable kitchen, Seth set up the furniture and tableware. Link had come here a few times with the field teams and parties of Oath Guards to raise his level. Now, he had come here in the name of love. Don't worry, you will return with more ingredients than you came with, once we are done here, the bard promised the chef confidently. Next, the bard brought out Ounce and Gliobum, who started playing a benign melody, completely out of character for the two. Once everything was set up and Link started cooking, Seth opened Legion again, leading out the two blindfolded girls. Why did the air suddenly become so cool? And what's this music? Finn asked a little confused, and Mina only had a knowing smile on her lips. I'm done with preparation, I will take your blindfolds off now. Then you can see for yourself, Seth answered with a chuckle and took off her blindfold. The fairy's eyes jumped open wide when she found that they were no longer in Mina's Mar, but a vast cavern, dimly illuminated by natural light. Is this the dark light crossing? Finn asked, surprised, recognizing the place. It seemed like his trick had worked on Finn. However, when he took off Mina's blindfold, she grabbed his armor and brought her face close to his. He could feel her breath as she whispered. So you really put us in Legion to bring us somewhere else, Honey, just what is this surprise? She asked with a playful, curious glint in her eyes. So you noticed? Seth asked, not too disappointed. Honey, I'm versed in traveling darkness, a blindfold won't do much to take my vision. But you didn't answer. You set up a table and even brought Link to cook. It can't be anything small if you put in this much effort. Come on, tell me. The cat girl tried to find out what he had prepared, but it wasn't that easy. You will see, but first take a seat, he said, and stole a kiss from the lips that were so close to his. Humph, fine. Keep your secrets, you ruffian. She complained playfully, but sat down at the table Seth had prepared. Finn, you, too. Please sit down. Let's have dinner. Afterward, I want to introduce you to a special dungeon, he said mysteriously. A dinner freshly cooked by Link in a special dungeon? I'm getting excited, Finn exclaimed happily and sat at the table. Accompanied by the play of Ounce and Gliobum, the three sat at the table. Finn tried to tickle information out of Seth, while Mina played along. Although she had said she would see, she thought he would break eventually when facing both of them, trying to make him spill it. However, soon the finished food stood on the table, and she lost Finn's support. The fairy was more interested in eating than in the dungeon. The conversation quieted down as the three enjoyed the three-course meal Link had just prepared for them. Maybe it was not as good as what he could do in his usual kitchen, but it didn't matter to them. The location and atmosphere made up for it easily. Finally, all dishes were emptied, and the fog of happy satisfaction glazed over their eyes. They simply enjoyed this state for several minutes, when Seth finally decided that it was time. I think it is time, I tell you, why we are here, he started off. The girls perked their ears, but didn't say anything. It's because I think I wasn't very fair to you too. Finn, it was weird how you became my girlfriend despite me having a fiancé, the bard stated, shocking both women at the table. While Finn was shocked stiff, Mina was already taking a breath to speak up in her favor, but Seth simply continued. Nonetheless, I love you. It was awkward in the beginning, but I love you as much, Amina, although differently. It isn't fair that Mina is my fiancé and you are my girlfriend. Finn's eyes dilated slightly, while Mina swallowed whatever she was about to say. Seth turned to Mina. Mina, our engagement came about as a happy accident, and I know you are not bothered by that. However, it isn't fair that I never properly asked you to marry me. And I really want to marry you, both of you. This is why I wanted to ask both of you, officially, to become my wives, he finally said and kneeled between the two of them, grasping their hands. Both of them looked at him with initial shock and bewilderment. When realization kicked in, Finn's eyes were slowly welling up with tears. Although she had not shown it, the difference in status may have been a cause of worry for her. While Finn was slowly breaking down, even the extroverted Mina was blushing furiously. She had an easy time dealing with his accidental proposal, but facing the genuine deal had even her heart fluttering. "Will you two marry me?" he asked clearly. "Why yes," Mina answered, baffled, her face red as a tomato. "Of course, you big dumb dofus!" Finn exclaimed, collapsing in his arms, crying happily and kissing him. Seth tried to speak up, but when he finally managed to get a breather from Finn, Mina, being a little jealous, gave him a forceful kiss too. "Okay, okay. Hey, stop pulling on my shirt. Not in front of Link. I'm not done yet. You are still getting your prize for deciding to enter this dangerous dungeon called marriage." Seth desperately tried to get the evening back on track and not lose his dignity in front of the gourmet hunter. Chapter 1363 The Dangerous Dungeon of Marriage. Pfft, the Dangerous Dungeon of Marriage, Mina chuckled. Right. I still don't have an engagement ring. Finn realized. Exactly, these are for you, Seth exclaimed when he finally got a chance and brought out a small jewel case in a bigger chest. The first holding the Bisha's set and the second holding the legendary Shadow Stalker set. Seeing the accessory set and the armor, the girls calmed down a little. Thankfully, Finn stopped trying to disrobe him. "Whoa, this looks even better than the armor we found at the shop in Spring City," Mina exclaimed, pulling the pieces of soft leather armor out of the chest. "Wow, these look really unique." "I really like the pendant," Finn commented, picking up the little jewel box. "Try them on. Yours is called the Bisha's set. I made it from the last prayer bead of Bisha's, a great monk of the past. Sivri helped me with the design and material choice," he explained to Finn before turning to Mina. "And yours is the legendary Shadow Stalker set. Nadal made it based on the armor we bought in Spring City, while Run was the one to enchant it. They used the leather from the shadow beast that Nadina used. It still has no soul, so if you find it lacking in any way, we can further improve it in the future." The blacksmith gave an introduction to the leather armor. With the two captivated by the new items, Seth had the chance to explain the items and their abilities further. He didn't elaborate on the lengths he went to make them, but explaining their effects in depth took long enough. Not that it bothered the girls. Things went as expected. The more he explained about the items, the more the girls got hyped up over the power of the new gear. They wanted to immediately put them on and test them. This was exactly why Seth didn't just have a nice little romantic dinner with them. His two fiancées were warriors, and when given a new weapon, they thirsted for a chance to test it and draw blood. He had made sure they were not just in a romantic place, but the perfect place to go off and test their new items. "Just pick a direction and we can immediately go try them in a dungeon," Seth said, happy that he had foreseen their reaction correctly. Things would have really flopped if one of them said no, or they were too tired from eating. With leave 100 plus dungeons in every direction, nothing stood in their way to test their new equipment to their heart's content. Except maybe one thing. "Arim, what about me?" Link, the fourth wheel on the tricycle, asked, embarrassed. He had almost been forced to watch the scene of the Tower Master being eaten up in the middle of a dungeon. Now, they were about to jump in a dungeon that was most likely too dangerous for him. "Here, get back inside Legion. It's safe in there. We will return to Minasmar once we are done," Seth instructed him and opened the portal to Legion's space. There was nothing much to write home about the dungeon the three entered. The blacksmith didn't even join the fight and ended up simply collecting materials. The fights ended as one-sided slaughter as the two women started testing their new gear, flinging around skills and spells with reckless abandon to get a feel for their new powers. At one point, Seth even started feeling sorry for the poor mob averaging at leave 120, as the girls wiped the floor with these usually terrifying dungeon minions. Finn testing the Shaco skills left a trail of mangled corpses behind. Especially the Void of Hada Shaco had equipped Finn with a terrifying attack spell. Mina, on the other hand, had become a shadow of death. Rows of enemies simply fell over, dead, after a simple shadow passed over them. Because of the armor, Mina didn't even have to use any fancy spells or skills to reap dozens of lives. Similar to Seth's situation, the power of her main skills were so drastically raised that even the simplest attack dealt enough damage to be devastating. Shadow manipulation and shadow drain were enough to kill most ordinary beasts around her own level. The whole dungeon dive turned into a power fantasy for the two, as they let loose. The most miserable was probably the dungeon boss, whom they teamed up on. Dude was too tough for his own good, allowing the girls to get slightly more serious. After collecting their loot from the dungeon core, he collected his 2 future wives, and they left the abyss together before returning to Woburn riding Vagra and Ridgedom. Soon, the 3 lovebirds returned to Minas Mar for a hot night of strengthening their bond. "I will call Lena later, so we can make an official announcement for the whole guild," Seth mentioned the next morning, as the 3 half-clothed people scoured the kitchen for breakfast. "I think we should wait with the announcement until everyone is back," Finn suggested, putting a carton of milk on the counter. "Why do you want to wait?" the blacksmith asked, a little surprised. He would have thought Finn, out of all of them, would have wanted to spread the info as quickly as possible. "I want to give everyone the chance to congratulate me right away, and we could have a proper party with everyone then. I think that is what we deserve," she said with a grin, giving Mina a look that made clear that the "we" in this case meant the 2 girls. "Yes, we should open the banquet hall once everyone is back and celebrate our engagement," Mina agreed, even increasing the stakes. "If that is what you 2 want, fine. Then we keep it a secret for now," the bard asked. It wasn't like he was against making it a big thing. Although he felt the urge to shout it from the rooftops, letting it ferment a little and make a big party was also good. "Yes, for now it's our secrets and ours alone," the fairy said happily. So they decided to keep their happiness to themselves for a little while longer. However, Seth still decided to let work rest for a day and spent it with just the girls. They savored their moment in time, before returning back to their daily routine. While the girls returned to the abyss to practice with their new equipment and pets, Seth was left behind at Minas Mar to work on the preparations for the strike against the voracious Cloud Continent. But before he could return to the workshop, he went to look for Mary and Lena. He had taken off that day on short notice, and they would probably give him an ear about it, but what could he do? Unexpectedly, he found Mary's office unattended when he arrived. Where could the secretary have gone this early in the morning? His eyes drifted through the office, seeing a small stack of papers on the desk. Was this the usual report she left him to read? Curious, he picked it up. It was a summary of the activities of the 2 teams currently on off-world missions. The first was just a short report about Love's success in testing demonic food products. It seemed like the trade treaty with the Night Elves was a promising source for food. The second was about Jane's and Monique's accomplishments in Perarian. Apart from Jane's trade agreement with the Empire, there was also an in-depth assessment of their magical technology. It seemed like they were much further advanced than expected, only held back by the lack of proper materials. Considering that the difficulty of working with magical materials was way higher if one lacked the support of the system, it was no wonder that a human empire was unable to advance their metallurgy past the refinement of mostly uncommon materials. Tord had once told him the tales of his ancestors about how difficult it was to refine magical metals before the system was introduced. Even dwarves struggled to work with a rare metal like mithril at that time. How bad was it for humans then? This was why their magical and technological knowledge rose way faster than the quality of materials they were able to refine. It seemed like the Empire was ready to trade this knowledge for higher quality ores and resources. Overall, it seemed like they would not have to worry about the food supply of the district. Maybe they could even gain useful magical engineering knowledge. Maybe Jonia was willing to take a trip to that school of magic to assess the worth further. Seth. The sudden shout of his name made the blacksmith jump. Mary and Lena, both breathing heavily, had suddenly appeared at the door, staring at him with a mix of worry and anger. "Love's in trouble. We have to act quickly," the 2 said in unison. "Love actually managed to run into trouble?" he asked, disbelieving. What could possibly trouble an existence like love? Chapter 1364 Sudden Escape. Paconea, 1 day ago. The room's door shook under the heavy hammering of an armored fist. Love and Reiki looked up in surprise. What was going on? Following the strikes that almost blew the door from its hinges was the authoritative voice, calling out loud and clear. "Lady Love! You and your entourage have to return immediately," the guard torturing the door called from outside. They knew the guard. They had been their guide and watcher for the past week that they were allowed to stay at the subterranean Nightolf compound. However, the situation was hard to understand. The negotiations and food testing had been going well. Since the Fae that accompanied them couldn't really be harmed by poisons, they were able to test the various foods and ingredients that the elf-like demons were able to provide. Things were going well, and they had been negotiating positively about various trade treaties. What had happened that they were suddenly trying to kick them out so rudely? There was only one way to find out. Reiki had already stood up and opened the door. "What is going on?" the revived bard asked the eager guard, that finally stopped banging against the door. The guard hesitated for a moment before he spoke. "We are in trouble. Our scouts warned us of a hostile force that has apparently found out about our location. The heir ordered for you and your people to be evacuated immediately. You have to return through the Hell Gate before they arrive." The guard didn't hide anything, saving them a lot of time asking. The elves intended to send them back to avoid diplomatic implications. If Love and Boudica's Fae were to be harmed during their stay here, it could lead to a misunderstanding. Although Love knew that they were overthinking things, when it came to Minas Mar, or the possibility of them getting harmed, she understood the intention. "All right, we will leave immediately. I will inform our company," Love agreed without any arguing. "I will leave a few guards to bring you to the exit, once you are ready," the guard replied and instructed two of his men to stand behind, while he hurried on to accomplish other tasks. The guard had barely left when Love pulled out her communication orbs and called Boudica. "Get ready, we are leaving immediately," she said the moment Boudica picked up the call. "What? Why?" came her surprised voice from the other end. "No time to explain, just make sure everyone is ready to leave within 5 minutes, Love didn't bother explaining any further and ended the call. "That was a little rude," Reiki commented jokingly. "Yeah, no time for niceties. You also get ready," she told her lover. "Already am," the bard chuckled. As a bard, he was already used to traveling with little luggage. He had so little, he had nothing to unpack to begin with. Love had quickly filled her inventory with her stuff and was ready to leave, too. She looked at the room one last time with a sigh. It was a really nice room, which they had gotten as the ambassadors of Minas March. Compared to the modern style of Earth, she really liked this kind of luxurious and embellished style of the elves. Love had looked forward to staying a little longer but, suddenly the whole structure shook. Love clicked her tongue. Seemed like it was already too late. "I guess their scouts were a little slow," Reiki commented, watching the dust and parts of the decorations fall from the ceiling. The two left the room quickly, meeting the guards waiting for them outside. "Please follow us. We will bring you to a passage that directly leads to the gate," the guard exclaimed when the two charged out of the room. Despite the rooms being quite lavish, the facility itself was very Spartan and sanitary. They followed the two guards down simple corridors covered in polished white stone. As someone not living in this place, it was a little more than a hard-to-memorize maze. Despite having stayed here for 2 weeks, she had no idea where they were going. At some point, she even suspected that the passages had changed. It was hard to believe that she couldn't memorize at least some of the paths. Her idle thoughts were interrupted when the whole structure rocked once again, and several stone panels detached from the walls and ceiling. "Careful," one of the guards called out, but Reiki had already made his move and pulverized the panel that was about to fall on Love. Seeing she was fine, the two men guiding them increased their speed. It seemed like the attacks were growing stronger. "It's not much further," the one in the lead exclaimed. "What about Boudica and the others?" Love asked without slowing her step. She was more concerned about the location than their lives. She doubted there was anything that could really endanger the Fae in this world. "We should meet your comrades at the passage. Another group of guards will bring them there," the guard beside her, who had also been saved by the bard's timely feat of strength, said under ragged breath. It wasn't every day that one was almost crushed by a ceiling panel, but he seemed a little too out of it. "Is there something I should know?" she asked the guard, who kept looking back at the collapsed corridor. "No. No, it's okay," he gave a distracted answer. Love made a mental note but didn't ask any further. If everything went well, she wouldn't have to care about their secrets. If something went wrong, she simply had to deal with it. "We are here. The entrance to the passage is just up ahead," the guard in the front called out, focusing her attention back to the direction they were running in. In front was a crossing that led to a slightly narrower hallway that led straight and far into the distance. Its end simply vanished in the distance. "This leads to a staircase that will bring you to the surface close to the Hell Gate," the guard explained, catching his breath. "You are not going with us?" Reiki asked suspicious. "There are no branches on this way, it's just straight out. We have to join our men," he said, and the structure shook once again, giving weight to his claim. While the guard who led them seemed convinced of his duty, the one who was almost rushed with love didn't seem as steadfast in their decision to return. "What about Boudica and the rest of our group?" Love asked once again. He had said they would meet here, but there were no signs of them. The guard grimaced. "Maybe they are a little slower? Maybe they got held up a little, but I'm sure they will follow right after you. Please, just get out while you still can," the man almost begged. "Fine, we will leave, for now," Love ultimately agreed. "Are you serious?" Reiki whispered to her, seemingly not in agreement with her decision. "We can just return if they don't show up. It's not like we're in great danger," the Death Bride said, confident in the survivability of the Faer. Even if they grew slowly and weren't the strongest, they were like cockroaches. "Fine, let's leave for now then." With that, they finally parted with the two guards, although one of them did so rather hesitantly. While the guard ran back into their headquarters, Love and Reiki ran down the long straight escape passage. They heard several more explosions and eruptions from behind them as they ran toward the Hell Gate, but no signs of Boudica and the others following them or catching up with them at any point. "Don't look so down. Once we reach the Hell Gate, we will contact Minasmar and get back up to clean up this place," Love soothed Reiki, who was a little more conflicted about simply leaving the other Faer behind. "All right, but couldn't we just call them from here?" the Bard asked, but Love shook her head. "Their base is shrouded. All outgoing communications are disrupted, even in this corridor." "I already tried," Love admitted. Technically, communication with orbs was possible across the Hell Gates, but the Night Elves were strict about outgoing signals. Despite their carefulness, it seemed that their enemy had found the base. They ran in silence for a while. The sounds and shakes of explosions grew silent behind them. "Look, up ahead. That has to be the staircase," Reiki exclaimed, pointing in the distance where they could see the foot of a wide spiral staircase, leading up. However, as they got closer, there was not only the staircase. A figure was coming down the staircase as they were running toward it. Chapter 1365 End of the Road. What walked down the staircase right in front of them was a creature they had never seen before. It resembled a mix of an angel and a lizardman. It had bird wings made of white feathers, similar to many avian beastmen and similar races in the Pathworks, but its body was covered in scales that shone in a greenish-golden hue. It wore a golden scale armor to protect its torso, but still revealed its wide build and massive muscles. In its hand, it carried some kind of blade staff or spear, also giving off a golden halo. It was obviously an enchanted weapon. "What the fuck?" the Bard exclaimed rather rudely at the weird sight. It seemed like the creature saw them, but it did not move from the stairwell, patiently waiting for the two humans to approach. "It seems that the commander was right in his decision to have us scout the vicinity of the Dread Gate," the being spoke up as the two got closer. "We almost had some of the vermin escape," he added. "Who are you calling vermin, buddy?" Reiki asked with a sharp edge in his voice. His hands were already holding his lute. "There is no use denying it. I smell the stench of death on you. Wicked demons," it exclaimed and swung the blade staff at Reiki, who was standing in the front. The attack was fast, incredibly so. Yet, it missed, passing through the Bard as a light note played in the corridor. However, the Bard didn't even get to start playing. The moment he evaded the opponent's weapon, a dark claw covered in black fog pierced the creature's chest. Its beak-like snout ripped open wide as it screeched in pain and terror. The dark fog ate through its flesh like it was cotton candy, rising up from the holes. Like wax in a time lapse, its flesh turned into a black sludge, melting off its bones. By the time the screech was ended by its imminent death, the bones also crumbled and fell into the puddle on the ground. Its corroded weapon and stained armor were the only recognizable parts left. "Love, your hand. I had this, you didn't have to get involved," Reiki lamented, looking at the crystalline black bones of his wife's right hand. The flesh that was burned away by the release of her power was already starting to regrow, but it wasn't like that made the pain disappear. "He called me smelly, there's no way I could let that stand. And look, I'm almost fully healed again." "No need to worry," she said with a smile. But Reiki knew that was a half-forced one. Although she knew how to hide it, she still had lingering regrets about the past. "It's okay," he said and pulled her in an embrace. She was surprised at first, but quickly leaned into it. After a while, she separated from her lover. "Thanks, really. But I think we should go up and see what is going on." We also need to report to Minas Mar, she said resolutely. Reiki nodded. They had a job to do. However, it was not as easy as they thought. I can't watch you hurt yourself like that. Would you give me this dance, my love? The bard spoke smoothly, as more of the creatures descended from above. Love smiled brightly. I see the way you shine. Take your hand, my dear, and place them both in mine. His somber voice echoed across the staircase. You know you stopped me dead every time I was passing by. I beg to see you dance one more time. Grasping her hands, they started dancing up the stairs in wild abandon. The sounds of their steps on the stone grew louder, turning into the beat of the song. Ooh, I see you every day, and oh my, I like your style. You make me wanna cry. And now I beg to see you dance one more time, he said, looking deep into her eyes. The music paused as the world only contained the two. Then their eye contact broke, and a wave of power broke out from the bard. Strong whines blew up the stairs, as the bard's attention turned to the creatures charging towards them. So I say, dance for me, dance for me, dance for me, oh I've never seen anybody do the things you do before. I say, move for me, move for me, move for me, I. And when you're done, I'll make you do it all again. The winged lizards froze, trying to resist the hypnotic chime, but Reiki continued singing one more time. I say, dance for me, dance for me, dance for me, oh I've never seen anybody do the things you do before. Even their greatest resistance didn't matter against the bard's hypnotic patter. Their bodies jerked against their will, driven by the mystic tune. I said, move for me, move for me, move for me, I. And when you're done, I'll make you do it all again. Finally, they started dancing in exotic, disjointed moves that didn't fit the physiognomy of a humanoid. With the attackers locked in furious dancing, that broke down their own bodies, Reiki turned back to Love. Just like a monkey, I've been dancing my whole life, trying to stop you from just walking by. Take my hands, my dear, and look me in my eyes. Their gazes were locked again. Ignoring the creatures wrenching and dislocating themselves in wild, uncontrolled dancing, both started to sing. Ooh, I see you every time, and oh my, I like your style. You make me wanna join. And now I beg to see you dance just one more time. Singing their duet, they pranced up the stairs, weaving in between the enemies, who started quickly falling. Raining down the spiral staircase like a bug hit by bug spray. With smiles of glee, they quickly reached the top of the stairs. However, when they finally exited the underground facility, they found the source of their problem. The forest covered in eternal twilight was already filled with a massive group of the winged lizards, waiting to charge down the staircase. The two shared another look and grinned. Reiki's voice swelled as the song spread through the vegetation. So I say, dance for me, dance for me, dance for me, oh I've never seen anybody do the things you do before. Phew, it's been a while since I gave such a long performance, the Faer said, wiping some sweat from his forehead. The song he had performed was especially deadly, unless sung with enough pathos and duration. However, his thoughts were disrupted when a small hand grasped the hem of his jacket. Love stood beside him, suddenly blushing furiously. Did you mean what you sang? She asked hesitantly. Suddenly, his own cheeks also became hot. Love had been pulled along by the magic of the music, but Reiki had wanted to sing it to reaffirm his feelings for her. He took her hand into his again, just like how it was when they danced. I couldn't have performed this well if I didn't mean every word, my love. Reiki. She jumped into his arms, touched by his romanticism. In the distance, they could hear the sound of some survivors puking furiously, but nothing could disturb their own little bubble of reality. When they calmed down a little, they turned back to the situation at hand. Let's get to the gate, Love finally said. In the distance the massive guardian tree rose up against the dim sky. The light of the Hell Gate illuminated the crown from below, giving it an ominous look. When they reached the edge of the crown, where the thick vines hang from the rims all the way to the ground, they halted in shock. Just below the crown, it was a field of weapons and armor. Blade staffs and swords with golden hues and slightly glowing scale armors were strewn about like the remnants of a battlefield. However, there were no bodies. Wow, they were really serious in trying to get to the gate, Reiki mumbled, estimating there to be thousands of armors. Of course, they had all been slaughtered by the guardian tree. Nobody was getting close to the entrance to Earth without permission. Let's go. Chapter 1366 Return? What do you mean, we should return? Love asked unwillingly. Once they entered the cover of the tree, the communication orbs functioned again. What do you mean, we should return? Love asked unwillingly. Once they entered the cover of the tree, the communication orbs functioned again, allowing them to call Mina's march. However, things did not go as she had hoped they would go. Seth is currently off the grid, and we can't just join a war on that side. At least not without his agreement, Mary said seriously. Although Seth had little involvement with the general operations and management of Mina's Mar, he was still the person with the last word. Love knew that, but she had not expected the Tower Master not to be there right now, otherwise, she was sure he would have agreed to send immediate reinforcements. Maybe he would have even sent a horseman or a beast of calamity. I know you want to help them, but it is too dangerous. You should return for now, so we can properly arrange a team to step in and look for Boudica and the others. Lena's suggestion came from the communication orb. She looked up at Reiki, and their eyes met. They didn't need words to know that they agreed on this. There was no way that would agree to return to safety first while they waited for other people to sort things out. Who knew what happened to their comrades while they waited for Seth and the rest to get moving? Earlier, Love had not thought there could be anything that would threaten Boudica and her people. But these things were strong individually and came in great numbers. Even if they failed to kill the Faer, it didn't mean they couldn't kidnap and torture them. Boudica and the others were not as strong as Reiki or Love. They wouldn't be able to resist such a massive disadvantage. They couldn't leave them behind. They needed their help, now. Reaffirming their choice with a deep look in each other's eyes, Love answered. Sorry, Lena, Mary. This is more of a notification than a request for permission. We are going back now. We just wanted to let you know, she finally said. Yet, returning alone was never an option. Mina's Mar, present. And that was yesterday evening? So roughly 8 hours ago, the blacksmith asked with a mix of concern and disbelief after Mary and Jane explained the situation to him. Nodding, Seth got up from his seat and walked toward the exit door. What are you doing? You can't just leave, Lena spoke up, but Seth lifted his hand to signal her to shut up. What I'm doing? I'm getting some of the big guys and going to get my Faer back, the blacksmith said, his voice deliberately carefree. There is nothing big to discuss here, I'm getting as much firepower as possible and getting them back, he said with a shrug. Of course, he was not as carefree as he played. Since they had lost time due to his absence, he had to hurry now. He wasn't going to blame himself for taking some time for himself and the girls, all he could do now was act fast and make sure nothing worse happened. To think Love had not called back for 8 hours didn't spell anything good. Paconea, 8h ago. Abruptly ending the call, the two were ready to go on their rogue rescue mission. However, are we using the passage to get back? Reiki asked her. They had no idea where exactly the subterranean base was located. Apart from the passage, they had few clues. I don't think that is a good idea. I think the other end of the passage has already collapsed. Otherwise, Boudica would have probably caught up with us, Love mumbled as she shook her head. Are you sure? The corridor was pretty long. What if they arrive after we go looking for them and they miss us? It's not like they can inform us of anything, Reiki voiced his doubts. Although Love wanted to act, she had to admit that he was right. If the passage didn't collapse and the team of Faer simply entered it way later than them, they may appear here while the two of them were wandering in the forest, trying to find the elevator to the main base, but there was a solution for that. Love pulled a small bronze-colored ball from her inventory, a golem eye. The improved scouting version with a remote screen that allowed anyone to share the scout's vision. With this, they were not forced to wait, unable to act, and they didn't have to risk their lives by returning into a possibly unstable tunnel. Good idea. Reiki praised as the golem eye descended the spiral staircase. The steps in the bottom of the vertical shaft were littered with corpses, but nothing unexpected so far. After passing the aftermath of their battle, the golem hovered down the straight corridor. 10 minutes. 20 minutes. 30, they had really run for a while. Love had not noticed that the passage was this long. They started believing the golem would make it all the way back to the base, but hope was actually blossoming, only to be dashed by a sorrowful sigh. The screen finally displayed a caved-in ceiling and a corridor blocked by debris. This had to be around the first third of the way. At this point, it would probably not have mattered how close behind the other group would have been, they never had a chance to go far down this route. Love sighed. Well, at least we now have the golem location as a waypoint and don't have to wander blindly, the bard tried to cheer her up. Since they received the golem's transmission, they could also locate it from above ground. They would lose their way in the dense, enchanted forest. Right, it's not like this changed anything. Let's go. Having made sure Boudica and the others wouldn't come via the secret passage, Reiki and Love set off. At first, they followed the signal of the golem, but this quickly became unnecessary. The noise of battle and explosions penetrated the silent forest. I guess that is where the main complex is, Love spoke up, when they saw the light of fire and spells in the dark sky. It had taken them roughly an hour to get to this point. They had passed the place where the golem had stopped in the passage a while ago. The fight seems to be in full swing, Reiki commented on the raging storm of war they could hear from a distance. Judging by roars, screams, the sound of breaking stone, and exploding spells, it was a terrible battle for survival. Let's hurry, it's not far now, Love said and charged forward, worried for her subordinates. We didn't talk about it, yet, but what will we actually do when we arrive? Reiki asked, running beside her. What do you mean? She asked, slightly confused by the question. I mean, our strategy is to save the others. Do we jump into the fight and help the Night Elves to win this? Are we just sneaking in to look for them? A mix of those, the bard explained his question. The winged creatures had attacked them earlier, so maybe they had enough reason to fight them, maybe they wouldn't even get the choice? We won't fight unless we are attacked. The priority is finding the others. If we have to fight, we will get rid of them as quickly as possible and continue looking, Love instructed. Their goal was not to save the demons. Although having saved them in a dire situation gave them an advantage for the future, Love had no intention to waste their already lacking manpower on someone else's battle. After the short exchange, they ran silently for another 20 minutes or so before a crater came in sight. Yes, a crater. The soil above the subterranean base was blown off, and the structure was laid bare for the winged lizards to attack. Wow, that's a little more than I expected, Love mumbled. Chapter 1367 Free Fall. Wow, that's a little more than I expected, Love mumbled. The Death Bride was not talking about the partially collapsed building complex sticking out from a massive crater, but the fact that it was already haunted, despite not even being a proper ruin yet. Standing at the edge of the wide crater, they watched a chaotic battle spread all over the exposed ruins and slopes. There were demon elves, winged lizards, and an army of shapeless ghosts emerging from the depths of the base. The translucent, fluttering beings were moving in swarms across the ruins, attacking indiscriminately. They were passing through the living and seemingly chipping away at their lives until they fell down as a cold corpse. It was quite eerie. Where did those specters come from? Reiki echoed her own thoughts, but she quickly came to an answer. They had always been here. This was the reason they were not allowed to move freely in the base, maybe it was the whole reason the base even existed. A version of a birthing pool that spat out ghosts instead of monsters. Since they were seemingly a weapon of the Night Elves, many of them seemed fine, even when some passed through them. On the other side, the winged lizards were not immune but had magic cast on them to block them. However, Love didn't have the time to ponder over the nature of the elves' hidden weapon. Sharing a glance, the two Fae jumped down the slope. They didn't see any of their people in the battle, so they had to be still inside. Using the chaos, they managed to sneak in with relatively little difficulty. Although they had to off one or two attackers, the specters actually ignored them. The situation didn't become any calmer inside the base, which was periodically shaken by explosions outside. Actually, they now faced an even bigger problem than the ongoing battle. The base was still a terribly complicated maze, and they had no idea how to find their way, much less search for someone. How are we supposed to find the others now? Reiki asked the important question. However, Reiki already had an answer to that. Without saying a word, she sped off, forcing the Skald to follow her in slight confusion. When she turned around the third corner, she found what she had been looking for. Charging past a night elf who was locked in desperate combat with an especially big specimen of the airborne reptiles, she struck the beast directly in the chest, releasing the power of death. The beast quickly started melting away, leaving behind a safe but confused elf. "Do you know who I am?" she asked the elf, as flesh slowly started crawling back up to cover her crystalline black finger bones. It still hurt every time she used her powers like this, but it was the quickest way to get what she needed. The elf looked at her for a moment before she finally nodded. Are you the ambassador from Minas Mar? She asked to confirm whether she recognized Love correctly. Shouldn't you already be on the way back? Love felt lucky. They had actually managed to catch someone who not only knew enough to recognize her but even had some knowledge of the general situation concerning their party. This will quicken things. We returned because the rest of our comrades did not manage to follow us. It seems like the escape passage collapsed behind us soon after we went through. Do you know where they are, or where they could have gone when they found the passage closed off? She asked concisely. This was her answer to finding their people, getting a proper guide to lead them through the labyrinth. I don't know where they are right now, but we could go to the passage and see if they are still close by. I don't think their guard would lead them far away passage in this situation, the quick-witted elf quickly replied. Love offered her a ticket to get out of this alive, she would have been stupid not to jump at the chance. Like this, they acquired a guide that led them around the base, back to where the escape originally started. Facing several cave-ins and changes in the path, Love and Reiki were glad they had gotten a guide. The fight outside would have probably ended already by the time they found their way into this place. But with the night elf leading them, it felt like they were making way quickly. They would have been faster if it weren't for the fight and specters they ran into. Although the incorporeal being ignored the Faer, their guide had to be more careful. By the way, what is up with these ghosts? Love asked on the way, after they had waited for a swarm to pass by the corridor they wanted to pass through. The elf smiled awkwardly and hesitated before speaking. Arim, well, from what I know, the necromancers were cultivating them at the central facility. Please, don't ask me about the how, she said. It didn't seem like she didn't know, but more that she didn't want to talk about. We saw some night elves outside that were not bothered by them, but you seem to be vulnerable. Reiki asked, running beside the two. She nodded shortly. They are the people who usually work with them. They have special magic to protect them. The rest of us relied on the anima armor to keep them out of base. Well, since everything broke down, they are now roaming everywhere, she explained. Since everything was already collapsing, it seemed like she had no qualms about divulging secrets. They went silent when they suddenly heard a boom of a spell. The rising noise of clashing weapons suggested there was a bigger battle close by. Love signaled them to follow her as she got closer to the place. What is this place? Love exclaimed, shocked, seeing a wide field filled with decaying corpses, bound by chains. There was a hole in the ceiling that led to levels above. From there, Liards kept storming into the room, cornering the group of night elves inside. It's a spectre farm, their guide said with a morose expression. Reiki and Love looked at her, shocked, but this wasn't the time to think about the demon business in this place. This was the first group of elves they came across since they met their guide. Let's help the elves. Maybe they know where Boudica and her people are, Love proposed. Agreeing with her, the three charged into the room. Guide number 1 wasn't of much help. The two Faer did most of the work, getting rid of the group of lizards. After a quick concerto by the Skald, the score was settled. Lady Love, what are you doing here? Were you not supposed to have left already? One of the elves wearing a dark robe stepped forward, when the situation finally calmed down and reptiles stopped falling from the ceiling. She had seen his robes before, they were the clothes of the necromancers of the elves. So he was one of the more essential people in this place with a certain amount of power. Another one with some knowledge, lucky. We came back when the rest of our group didn't follow us. I'm looking for Lady Boudica and her subordinates. The passage we left thought collapsed sometime after we left, Luft explained again. I understand. In that case, they are probably in the shelters, where all non-combat and essential personnel are supposed to go, the elf said with certainty. His voice didn't waver, so Love was willing to believe him. We could go together if you like. I was also on my way there, he suggested. She was about to agree when they suddenly heard a high-pitched bleep. The eyes of the caster ripped open wide as he cast a dark blue shield that covered the whole group. Suddenly, the whole base shook. This was not the small tremors and shakes that went through it all the time, not even like the big ones that collapsed the wall panels. This really shook the whole facility. Through the hole in the ceiling, Love saw the floor above collapsing as they were swallowed by a bright light. When it reached them, it was stopped by the shield for a moment, but they were quickly swallowed by the light and the heat. Love was blinded when she suddenly lost the floor under her feet and started free falling. She felt the burning pain as her flesh was boiled off her enriched necron bones. Even worse, she could feel the burn in her bones themselves. Despite being used to pain already, she screamed in terror and fear. A scream that went silent, as she was just a black skeleton falling. Finally, the light dimmed, and she hit the ground. There was no telling how long it took for her to recover, but when the pain subsided there was only one thought on her mind, and when her tongue grew back, her first words were, "Reiki? Reiki, where are you? Please answer. Please, please be okay." Chapter 1368 Nude in a Shaft. What had just happened? She couldn't grasp how things had come to this. She knew that she had fallen, but when her sight returned, there was the open sky above her. Her just regenerated heart dropped a beat. She had fallen to the bottom of a shaft. At the walls above, she could see the cross-section of what remained of the demon base, almost nothing. A tremendous attack eradicated anything in its path and drilled a hole straight through the subterranean facility. "Reiki? Where are you? Please answer," she called out desperately. It didn't matter to her what happened to the elves. At this point, she didn't think of Boudica either. All she could think of was the rising dread as her thoughts kept circling around the unthinkable. Maybe, just maybe the attack had been strong enough to even disintegrate the Faer. Maybe Reiki was dead? She tried to convince herself that it couldn't be. The Faer were immortal, right? She couldn't have lost him. It simply wasn't an option. Desperately, she walked around the bottom of the shaft, clawing at debris and moving boulders out of the way. The Skald had to be somewhere around here. Maybe he just hadn't regenerated enough to answer her? Or he was stuck and couldn't hear her. Yeah, that had to be it. It had to be. To think one of you evil creatures had survived divine wrath, she suddenly heard a voice from above. The flying lizards were descending from above, obviously to check for survivors of their attack. Divine wrath? So that was your attack just now, the bride asked, very worldly wrath simmering in her stomach. Her sorrow, worry, and desperation quickly started flipping. This was all their fault. Pulling them into their stupid little skirmishes. They hurt Reiki, maybe even killed him. What are you waiting for? Clean up the demon, so we can finish this. The lizard leader ignored her and ordered his men to attack Love. A bad idea, considering her current state of mind. Like a trigger, following his words, a nova of death washed through the hole. The halo of death, the leader cried out, watching the scene in horror. The troop of avian reptiles that charged at her at their leader's command turned into a shower of blank bones and black sludge the moment the dark aura washed over them. She had released her aura, and any mortal life in Love's vicinity was reaped, including her own flesh. However, the leader and about half his men escaped the devastating attack thanks to their altitude. Now, they were facing a black, crystalline skeleton exuding an aura of death that decayed anything that came in touch with it. We cannot deal with such evil powers. Keep her occupied, I will get the Fulguries too, the leader commanded. Despite telling his men to buy time and die, none of them so much as grunted or complained. Love spent no thought on suddenly facing over 50 flying enemies that had no care for their lives. While they carefully attacked from outside the range of her aura, the skeleton had thrown out any rational thought or strategy, simply chucking spears of black light at her attackers. There was no fear of the powers depleting, she only used to lock them away because of the pain they brought. Another worry that fell away, as her heart hurt more than any bodily ailment. Blade staffs and light magic attacks kept hitting her body, some scratching, others breaking her bones, but she ignored the damage. It repaired itself anyway. It always repaired itself. She focused on picking them off with her attacks. What she didn't have in accuracy, she made up for in the number of attacks. Although she never found out where this aura originated from, it never depleted. She could heal and attack forever, only stopping when all her enemies were dead. She would slaughter every last one of them. She would haunt their people and eradicate their entire race for what they did today. The price for their deeds was her becoming their god of death, their nemesis, their doom. She would. Suddenly, a warm golden glow shone into the deep hole, driving away the shadows and aura of death. She had been almost done, just 5 more pests were floating above her, when suddenly all the spears of darkness she was about to fire vanished from her control. Not just that. Against her will, she could feel her aura being driven back into her bones. She was unable to release it again. Suddenly, she was only a black skeleton, basking in the warm shine of an unknown magic. However, unlike the bright ray of destruction from earlier, it did not harm her. On the contrary, the spell that suddenly enveloped her boosted her healing, and her body rapidly recovered. With her death aura sealed, she had suddenly become a powerless, naked woman standing alone at the bottom of the shaft. This was the first time she faced such a situation during the entire time of her existence. Even when the Tower Master gave her a chance to be reborn in a new body, she always had access to the dark power that filled her existence, but now it was sealed. Looking up, she found a new group descending into what used to be the base of the Night Elf demons. But it was apart from the lizards with bird wings she met before, there was a new group she didn't know. Among the beings coming from above, Love spotted tall humanoid figures that floated with magic. Elves? Not their demonic hosts, but beings that actually looked like elves. Tall, handsome, with long ears and hair like honey in color. Their eyes glowing in green or gold made a piercing contrast to their marble skin. Wearing either bright silver armor or white robes, they stuck out from the lizards in their golden body armor. The one who had spoken was one of the elves, wearing an especially ostentatious robe. They definitely had the look and style, although they seemed bigger and more sturdy than the elves she knew. Like a hulkied-up version of the androgynous pretty boy race. Who would have thought that such evil hid in such an innocent shell? The most ostentatiously robed elf spoke solemnly. He carried no weapon, but a massive book, bound in golden covers. His sentence distracted Love from the shock of losing her power. Suddenly, she realized that she was completely naked with a massive host of male enemies ogling her. For a moment, she thought of the irony that she actually ended up using it, as a set of silver armor covered her bare body. She felt the power of the armor surge through her. The moon was shining brightly in the sky, lending her its aid. The rush of power cleared her mind. Getting consumed by her rage and sorrow was not helpful in surviving here. If she wanted to get revenge, she had to use her head. Right, if they thought this was over when they sealed her power, then they were wrong. Since gaining a corporeal body, Love had spent her free time training her magic skills, since she couldn't always harm herself to fight. This was also why Seth gave her this armor, a lunacy set. Even if they sealed her power, she was not defenseless. "Don't think you will get to live with this memory, perverts," she stated, having come to her senses and started casting a spell in her mind. It was the strongest spell she knew, but despite struggling with it before, it had suddenly become so easy. "I don't know how a filthy creature like you can withstand the holy field, but it matters not. Your power has been suppressed. Kill her," the ostentatious elf commanded, and the lizards charged down to end her. In less than half the time she usually needed, barrage of darkness jumped from her fingers almost effortlessly. Her heart jumped in shock when she saw the storm of spears they unleashed upwards. But not as shocked as her attackers. Irg. Arg. A massive, dense cloud of dark spears shot upwards, surprising attackers as well as the caster. She had never worn the armor before. Love wanted to become better at magic first before relying on superior equipment. How stupid she was! To have denied herself this power, the casting reduction was already surprising, but the spell itself was easily more than 10 times stronger than it was supposed to be, without dealing as much as a dent to her mana pool. She also felt several times stronger than before. A smile of derision appeared on her face as her confidence shot through the roof, only to be dampened by a vast barrier, stopping her attack like it was nothing. She had only managed to take down a handful of stragglers who were too far ahead. "Your dark magic will not stand in my presence," the elven commander exclaimed, as his minions raised their staffs, further strengthening the barrier and obviously beginning to cast a spell. The next moment, the barrier was hit by a rain of various elemental spells, shaking it violently. "Then how about ours?" a woman with flaming red hair exclaimed, several casters behind her firing the next volley already. Boudica. Chapter 1369 Boudica. Boudica. You were alive! Love exclaimed, happily surprised. Although she was glad their comrades were okay, she was happy for a different reason. If the other Faer survived the earlier attack, it meant Reiki also had to be around here. All of them smell of death. Yet, none are affected by the holy magic. There was a commotion among the lizards, suddenly faced with the paradox of the Faer. Somehow, they were able to recognize their special trait, but thought they were undead? "We will not accept this perversion of life," the leader gave his verdict, ignoring the attacks from Boudica and her men. Instead, the staffs of the elves around him started shining even more intensely, and the book of gold in his hand began exuding a bright radiance. A bright disk began forming below the feet of the casters. Love quivered when she recognized the light. It was the same attack that had torn a hole through the base. At this distance, would it be enough to truly disintegrate them? As Love's mind was starting to fill with panic, watching the disk of searing light grow, the disk suddenly started wavering, as the soothing sound of a lute started playing at the bottom of their hole. "Hello darkness, my old friend," a voice sang softly, causing all the light in the shaft to dim, oh so slightly. Tears started shooting up, burning in her eyes, as she recognized the voice. Happiness and relief quickly clouded her mind as a figure playing his lute had appeared not far away. "I came to talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping, left its seeds while I was sleeping. The vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence," and suddenly all sound in the shaft fell silent. All casting fell silent, and the magic that was in the middle of shaping fell apart. In restless dreams I was alone, felt like all my happiness was gone. 'Neath the halo of an oil lamp, I turned my gaze to a room, cold and damp. When my eyes were stabbed by the flash of a zealot's light, that split the night and disturbed my sound of silence. Their eyes met, and in Reiki's eyes, she could see that he had shared her worries and sorrow, thinking he may have lost her again. After sharing a short but meaningful glance, he turned back to the creatures in the sky. The threatening magic had vanished, but the music only bought time. Beyond the dogmatic light I saw 10,000 beings, maybe more. Beings talking without speaking. Beings hearing without listening. Beings citing hymns that voices never share. Caught in their own sound of silence. Love was racking her brain about what she could do, when a crescent of light shot from the book-bearer and struck down Reiki. The bard's lute was split in two, while blood sprayed from a deep cut across his chest, from the shoulder down to the hip. "Fool! Do you not know that evil grows like a cancer? Hear my words that I might teach you. Use your ears, so they..." His words fell on deaf ears. Seeing Reiki fall in a cloud of his own blood broke the death bride's dams, and all the emotion she had tried to hold back to stay rational flooded her mind. Spears of darkness drummed against the golden shield, like heavy rain. The weakened shield quickly showed signs of breaking, as Love's conviction shot rose to the stars. She used to avoid reckless actions, but the lunacy armor encouraged them. She went all out in her rage, yet the book-bearer swung his staff, and the barrier was instantly repaired, regaining its pristine state. The being beyond the shield suddenly bowed and prayed. Just who was the god they obeyed? The other Faer had already stopped their attacks in shock, seeing their efforts voided with such ease. Luft only halted when the disk of light reappeared, rapidly growing with increased intensity. Her knees grew weak, and she could no longer deny reality. They were done for. She saw no way they could survive this attack, even if they were Faer. If there was nothing left of them, they would die, when the dastardly chants of their torturers fell silent one again. No, not silent. They were overshadowed by a noise that shook the world itself. No voice nor natural sound could defeat this vibration of destruction. It was so violent, Love had a hard time breathing. Suddenly, a voice spoke, not loud, but easily cutting through the sound and heard by everyone. Hundreds of eyes turned to the sky. There was the silhouette of a black dragon, cast against the full moon. On its back stood a man in heavy armor, cranking an otherworldly machine, producing a sound that drowned creation. He spoke a language she didn't know, but when his sentence ended, the gold light that suppressed her, the golden barrier, the threatening disk, even the magical glow of equipment, went dark, only leaving the moon to illuminate the scene. The music grew more violent as the Tower Master's hands started dancing on the keys of his wheel fiddle, and he started singing. Again, she didn't understand what he was saying, but a picture formed in her mind. An entity as old as the universe, that shone in darkness, before the first suns were born to create shadows. A concept she couldn't grasp, but undoubtedly real. A faceless, terrifying entity hiding in the cracks of space for eternity. A black sun. So real and yet not, that she imagined seeing it. A ball of flaming fire, darker than the night sky, swallowing the moon and growing. It spoke to her. She could feel it in her mind. Offering salvation of another kind, seductive, transformative, cold, and yet its dark light was still able to spread warmth like the sun. Before she knew it, everything fell into darkness. They were no longer at the bottom of a hole, but on a vast, dark plain made of black, molten metal. It was surreal, like a dream. They were in total darkness, yet she could see her surroundings as clearly as ever. She saw the elves and the lizards, there were even more than just those that came to attack them. She saw the small group of Faer, herself and Reiki, the Tower Master, Tatzel, and a group of golems he brought with him. Towering behind them were the silhouettes of Hellion and heads, too. In the sky shone the black sun, despite the fact that he could have sworn she stood on the black sun, although she didn't know how she came here. Like it could be everywhere and at every time. Although there was no light, there was the music playing like a raging storm, and suddenly, she knew what she had to do. She fell to her knees, as did everyone else, but the guys floating in the sky. And they all started reciting words they didn't know, yet came to their mind from the void. She didn't know the words, but she got their meaning. They were the epitaphs of the Black Sun, Blood Raider, Land of Terror, Iron Body, Tremor Hell, Invincible Fear, Nemesis of Fire, Dark Angel. As if they were calling upon a god, they chanted its names like evangelists. While their enemies resisted, the choir of Minasmar prayed to the omnipotent darkness, faster than any light, as if they would be nothing without it. To their black sun. They prayed for their salvation, to burn the sinner for eternity and turn their hearts to stone, for they would be without a future, without its help. And ultimately, the predator of hell moved. With burning hunger, it craved the flesh of man and consumed those who did not worship its presence. Love watched the tendrils of fire, emerging from the sun in the sky, the plane they stood on, and the very space itself, grasped the lizards and elves, who desperately called upon their deity for support. At some point, the music faded, and the vision of the black sun finally faded, although Love had no idea whether it actually was just a vision. Now, only the book-bearer and his closest group of priests were left. His ostentatious robes were only rags, and he was covered in burns, but they had survived. It was not just his robes that were gone, but his facade had long since crumbled. You dirty, filthy, heathen! Demons and demon worshippers! Even if I have to lay down my life and summon God himself, I will smite. Interrupting his tirade and rudely asking for his attention, was a long silver sword, cheekily emerging from his chest. With an extremely tired look, the Tower Master had appeared behind the elf and finally ended his life. The surrounding priests turned to him in rage, but were swallowed by a nova of pale blue flames. To survive even after I performed such a difficult piece, now, that's just rude. Chapter 1370 Played to Survive. When Seth arrived on the ground in the shaft, his knees gave way, and he simply sat down on the ground. That song had been way worse than the bard expected, based on the description. At some point, he had not played to overwhelm the enemy, but to keep his own life. It was just supposed to block their magic and harm them a little. The outcome was simply way over the board. The bard had no idea how it came to that, but the piece had completely sucked all energy out of his body. Had he known how dangerous it actually was, he would have just relied on Hellion and Heads to do the rough work. Slightly shaking, Seth drank a universal recovery potion, increasing recovery for mana, stamina, mental power, and health to a certain extent. It was weaker than a specialized potion, but it helped stop the shaking. This song was officially added to the playlist of music that would not be played again. Especially since he had to do the last hit himself. However, he was not mad about having to deliver the last hit. There was an unexpected gain to the whole situation. That weird elf had to be close to the threshold of a legend, to survive and protect his close allies from that terrifying black sun. Its strength was reflected in the change to the ravenous Sog, and himself. Seth usually avoided using the sword that drank blood and souls, for the simple fact that he had a vested interest in harvesting those souls himself. As such, he had not experienced the power of its second effect, to absorb blood and souls to strengthen the user, often. It also seemed like the condition to trigger it was that the victim had to be as strong or stronger than the wielder. For the first time since he wielded the ravenous Sog, the blacksmith experienced a significant gain. While the sword's magic capabilities rose, Seth actually gained a trait from slaying the near-legendary elf. The trait Radiant One had two effects. The first was raising his light elemental damage by 50%. That was good, but the second effect was the real boon. The trait actually gave him the passive skill Light Affinity starting at level 3. Affinity skills were not easy to come by, as the only natural way was to actually have a great affinity with an element. Seth himself had an affinity with fire. He was also granted the skill Earth Affinity through the blessing of Hades. The difference of affinity could be easily seen by the fact that he had maxed out Fire Affinity to the point he became a kin of fire. Earth Affinity, on the other hand, had only risen by one level ever since he got it. But even if he had no affinity with light, just having the skill was great as it raised his resistance and base damage in the element at the same time. Considering that Light Affinity started out at level 3, it raised both by 30%. Meaning the trait almost doubled the power of his light-based attacks and his resistance to them. Since he started out with 35% resistance to light thanks to other traits, he now had 65% resistance to light damage, which rivaled his earth elemental resistance. Seth was never unhappy about a good power-up. It almost made up for the bad surprise of the song. "Seth, are you okay?" Reiki asked as Love and the other Fae approached. Seems like he didn't have long with his own thoughts. The situation had to be dealt with. He looked at the group approaching and sighed. "I guess I'm better off than you guys," the demonic bard joked, looking at them. Apart from Love, they all wore rags that barely covered their bodies adequately, indicating that they had been absolutely wrecked at some point. At least they were alive. The same couldn't be said about the night elves. Looking up, there was little that remained from their base, and there had been none in the realm of the Black Sunday. So much for our potential business partners, hey! Seth thought to himself, when Boudica suddenly jumped at him, giving him a tight embrace. He was forced to reciprocate unless they both fell over. "Thank you so much for saving us, boss," the originally cool beauty cried out with tears in her eyes. Well, she did go through a near-death experience, he guessed. It was a shame he wore the heavy armor, but he was an engaged man, so maybe it was better that he did. All right, calm down. I only did what was natural. It's not like I can allow some randos to touch my people," he said, patting her on the back. As they were busy with the reunion and counting their limbs, Tatzel descended into the hole to give them all a lift out of it. The Fae happily joined the golems at the rim of the crater, but only Love and Reiki stayed back to speak with Seth. "Will it really be okay?" Love suddenly asked. "What do you mean?" the blacksmith asked, but he had an inkling about what she meant. "Those people were terrifyingly strong. What if we got involved in something we shouldn't have?" the Fae asked. Love was worried they had poked a dragon, making an enemy they should not have. A funny thought, considering they even intended to pick a big fight with Spacia and the voracious Cloud Continent. "I would say there is no massive need to worry," the blacksmith gave his opinion. In fact, he didn't quite mean it when he called these attackers some random hoodlums. He had an idea who they were. Seth had recognized the figure of the elf. Although a high intelligence attribute did not necessarily raise one's wisdom or ingenuity, it gave one a great memory and quick judgment. The blacksmith still remembered the withered corpse he and Al found in the birthing pools of the cave world. It would have been a tremendous coincidence for the same kind of race to attack demons on two completely different worlds. The bard also doubted that he, or rather Love and the others, were that unlucky to suddenly face an ancient enemy of the Abyss. The most rational explanation was that these guys were a faction actively at war with the Abyss Alliance. For it to happen in the short time when Love and the others were present was unlucky, but this kind of attack probably happened all over the Abyss all the time. At least he hoped so. The alternative was that they were incredibly unlucky. He shared his thoughts with Love and Reiki. "A group that is actively warring against a union of several demon worlds," she mumbled. "But isn't that even more reason to worry?" she asked. Her judgment was sound. A powerful group that took up the fight against a huge alliance of demons was not to be underestimated. However, we have an idea about who they are, but they have no idea who we are. Not even a soul made it out of this place after I arrived. If anything, they will blame the demons, the Tower Master explained with a shrug. The Black Sun had swallowed the enemy as sacrifices, and Seth had taken care of the remaining group himself. They just had to vanish from this place, and if they ever made contact again, make sure they were not seen as demon sympathizers. "What about the Night Elves?" Love asked about their business partners that just suffered a terrible loss. "Tough luck. I think we should block the Hell Gate once we left. It seemed like those guys tried to invade Earth, too," the blacksmith said with a shrug. Another trade partner was nice to have, but the desperate Purican Empire would probably be enough to get them through the trick of it. After all, the whole reason they looked for trade partners to acquire food was to gain time to rebuild their own granaries. Just restoring the subterranean facilities of Delta to 80% would be enough to support the current Minasmar with basic food needs. Meanwhile, Y City was also working on reclaiming some of theirs. They just had to weather that period. "So my work here was for naught," Love sighed. "No need to be depressed. Things can't always work out for us," the blacksmith cheered her up. "Did they really have edible stuff?" he asked curiously. "Yes, they had quite the array of fruits with peculiar tastes," Reiki answered with a smile. "I actually still have a few in my inventory. Maybe Karina could grow them in Earth," Love suggested. Listening, Seth got curious about the food. "Yes, we can ask her later. Let's go home now.